Welcome, everyone, to the How to Safely Adopt, Scale, and Measure Automation and AI Across Your Supply Chain webinar. I'm super excited to be joined by Bill Shube today. Bill, thanks a ton for joining us.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Adam.
Awesome. So I'll share a little bit of context on how this specific session came to be before I turn it over to Bill for a quick intro. So over the years of Parabola, a lot of times when we've been kicking off engagements with new teams, it's been focused on really specific problems. We have this freight invoice audit process that we know isn't scalable. It needs to be automated. Our inventory won't reconcile across different systems. How can we automate that specific process? And we've recently, yes, that still exists, but seen this shift towards top-down mandates, often related to we need to start adopting AI as an organization. We need to become more automation focused. And now, how do we actually get from where we are today to having this adopted and rolled out across the organization? And so when we thought about individuals who are in our network, who have had some of the success and been a real part of rolling out tooling across the organization and understanding the supply chain complexities that are associated there, Bill was the first person that we reached out to. So, Bill, again, it's great to have you here, and I'll turn it over to you for a quick intro.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks. So before I start, actually, you guys can see from my tag here, I work for the Lego Group, but a little bit of fine print. I'm not here on behalf of the Lego Group. I do not speak for the company. I speak on my own behalf and behalf of my own business that I'm working on starting up called Supply Chain Watchtower, where I plan to help small to mid-sized organizations gain better insights into their business through the use of automated analytics. So apologies for the fine print. That's what I have to do to make the lawyers happy. My background. So like I said, I've been with the Lego Group for now going on 13 years. Always in the supply chain, almost always in analytics, and about 6 years ago, beginning in 2019, I started really getting into automation and automated analytics, and that has really just completely changed the trajectory of my own career and the way that we work with data in our supply chain in general.
That's awesome. I'm sure a lot of people on this call are kind of in a similar state to where you were previously, living in Excel all day long, doing planning processes, kind of haven't had eyes opened yet to all the possibilities that are out there with automation. And so just to give you a little sense of what to expect in this conversation, we'll ask Bill some questions about his experience for about the next 30 minutes, and then we'll leave the last 10 minutes for a little bit of Q&A. So feel free to drop questions in here as we go. Now, Bill, you kind of told us a little bit about the adoption journey at the Lego Group, but I'd love to kind of hear from square one, what was that experience like, kind of seeing the organization go from spreadsheets to automation?
Yeah, so spreadsheets, like I was the Excel guy in our supply chain for many years. And then back in 2019, I joined the demand planning team, and we needed some reporting. And so my manager, of course, tasked me with reporting. I was, after all, the Excel guy. Prior to that, my MO was stuff as much data into an Excel file, write some VBA on top of it, a bunch of formulas, and hope it doesn't break. And we know what happens with those files. They always break, right? They get too big, they get clunky, they crash all the time. It stinks to work with them. And I was tired of that. I had heard of Power BI at the time. And so I said to my manager, hey, I'm going to do this reporting, but I want some leeway to try to do it differently because I don't want to do Excel anymore. I think we can do better. So I tried out Power BI, couldn't quite get it to do what I wanted it to do. Stumbled upon another software similar to Parabola, and apologies, Adam, it is not Parabola. This was 2019. I think Parabola was in its infancy and not really even an option at the time. But software similar to Parabola, and it just changed everything. Within a few months, we went from being stuck in Excel to I had built out a set of workflows, ingesting about like a dozen different data sources from kind of all across all across the systems that we in demand planning needed. And I was able to consolidate all that into a one-stop shop for me and my team. And we all of a sudden had all the data we needed at our fingertips, all in one place. And it was fully automated. And it just, like I said, it just changed everything. And it got leadership thinking, well, if we can do this for demand planning, then gee, can we do this for the rest of the rest of our supply chain operations? And so this, what I did in 2019 led to 6 years later, the creation of the group that I'm in now, which is a team of 6 citizen developers, and it's our job to deliver automated analytics and business process automation to our supply chain organization.
That's an awesome journey. And it sounds like you guys landed in a really awesome spot, but there's obviously things that you wish you knew as you were kind of getting started on this journey. So I'm curious what your maybe top three pieces of advice would be for this group as they kind of get started or continue to iterate on their automation journey.
Yeah. So first, I wish I could do more than three. I know we have limited time. There are so many things that we have learned over the course of this 6 years. There's just so much to know and so many ways to improve. But three items that really stand out for me are starting small and iterating, documentation, and data quality monitoring. So this is just heads up, audience. This is very much the unsexy side of AI and automation. But these things I've found are really, really crucial to not just bringing automation to your organization, but to really being able to bring automation to your business at scale and be able to build multiple automations and manage them all without overwhelming yourselves. Because it's one thing to build like one or two automations and say, okay, we're good, and then like fine, maybe you don't need the documentation, maybe you don't need the data quality monitoring, but we've got 60 plus workflows feeding into 20 plus end analytic products across, servicing like 60 plus consumers, data consumers. It's a lot for a team of 6 to manage. And so we really have to be much more systematic about it. So to start with, start small and iterate. One of the things, so after that demand planning experience, we started to dive into we were tasked with developing some fill rate reporting, which sounds like it should be simple for reasons I won't get into. It wasn't. And in doing this, we came across just this treasure trove of supply chain data, not just for fill rate, but it touched like end-to-end supply chain. And we got greedy and we said to ourselves, oh my gosh, we can really solve a lot of problems with this data. And we tried to build something big all at once. And we lost sight of the fill rate. The big thing got bigger and bigger, got way too complicated. We didn't have enough experience at the time really to like build the data correctly. And it just got messy. And in the meantime, if we had just put some blinders on and said, okay, we're going to focus on fill rate, we probably could have delivered it in about a month. As it stands, we eventually did get that fill rate out there, but it was clunky, it was difficult, it took many months to get it out there. And so really, I say like pick one use case. As I said, put some blinders on, accept the fact that you're probably going to have to do some rework as you expand it, but starting small and iterating your way into something bigger is a really great way to approach these things, especially if you haven't done it before. And in fact, if you, as you're looking for use cases, if you have to choose between a high value, high complexity use case or a low value, low complexity use case, I would absolutely suggest to go for the low value, low complexity one initially. It's just you're so much less likely to run into a bunch of roadblocks and just screw a bunch of stuff up. So
To your parallels about,
yes,
there's the world of software engineering that has their predefined best practices for decades and decades, and now operators are just starting to learn some of these best practices. When you're getting started in software engineering, you're building really simple apps. Maybe it's a checklist, it's a to-do item. It's not a full-fledged ERP. And so to your point, there is this maybe connotation that things that are small and maybe not having a huge business impact to those things really need to get automated. But at the end of the day, those are some of the best opportunities to learn the fundamentals so that you can actually scale up to a lot of that more impactful work. So you hit on starting small and iterating. Your other two there were documentation and then data quality monitoring.
yeah. So documentation in that same use case, the fill rate one that I described. We just built and built and built, and we didn't bother writing anything down. And we got to the point where we couldn't figure out why we had built things the way that we had built them. And not only that, but one of us on the team had built this part, another had built that part, and then if one of us wanted to go on vacation, but like invariably something would break down, and we'd get a call on vacation, right? And so again, like if you're just starting off, this isn't so obvious because you just got one automation, two automations, but you need to think a little bit further ahead as you're scaling these things out. You need to know exactly what these automations are doing at multiple levels of detail, so that when the person who wrote the automation moves on to a new role, is on vacation, leaves the company, wins the lottery, like whatever, you need to be able to right to just hand it off to somebody else and have that person be able to take the reins and understand what's going on. And this shouldn't be a surprise. Like we're in operations, we are used to documenting processes, right? Like that is a pretty important part of what we do in operations. But when we move from operations to this digital world, we kind of like we just forget, right? And so so document everything. And I'll add, like, I hate documentation, drives me crazy, but there's some but I force myself to do it. And with AI now, there's some really, really great tools for doing it. Parabola has actually, I think, done a really good job implementing those. So like in Parabola, you can document every single tool that you have built, and you can use AI to do that. And that's a huge time saver, makes it much easier to do, much makes it harder to put off because it is so easy. You can use a chatbot to like summarize what does this workflow do, kind of step by step. Um, and yeah, there's just, don't put off documentation. And the last thing I would say for documentation is also proofread it. Don't, if you're the one who built the thing, don't don't just write it and forget it. Like, hand it off to somebody else for readability, because you're not writing it for yourself. You're writing it for the rest of your team and anyone who's going to inherit this thing after you.
Love it. And it was awesome to see some of the success you had generating documentation with AI and Parabola. That was super cool. Can you tell us a little bit about how data quality monitoring has kind of helped you all scale up?
Yeah, so this is another kind of like sneaky one. Again, super unsexy, but what very often happens when you're building out these automations, especially automations that are dependent upon manual Excel files, which is pretty common. Um, Data quality becomes an issue, and I think this is probably no surprise when you've got a manual Excel file that somebody's responsible for maintaining every day, every week, whatever it is. Like, people screw those up, right? They change the name of a column, or they move a column somewhere, or they put the wrong information in the wrong column, or they change the file name. Like, there's so many different ways to screw these things up. And these these process automations that you're putting together, they will choke on very, very small changes like that. And if you're not watching out for them automatically, uh, you can end up piping bad data straight through your data pipelines and outputting it to your end consumers, and nobody's going to notice, right? Like, and they could start making decisions off of incorrect data, for one. And that, obviously, that's bad. The other thing that actually I've found more often happens is that your end users notice the errors, and they come back to you and tell you that there's a problem. And so, like, great that you spotted the problem, but if it happens too many times, you start to erode trust in your end users. And then they're going to stop using the automations that you've built, and they're going to go back to their manual ways, because they'll look at this thing that you put together and say, oh yeah, but it's usually wrong, right? So they don't touch it, and now you solve nothing. And it's actually, like, if you're thinking ahead, it's really easy to put those checks in place. You're gonna, once you get the hang of this, you intuitively know where those errors are going to come from, and you can put little triggers, just a little Slack message. Hey, this column was blank, right? And if it's blank, it sends you a Slack message, and then you can go and communicate with your end users and say, hey, watch out, this thing is broken, I'm on it. And people are okay with that. If you tell them that there's a problem, if you're on top of it, like, they don't mind the occasional error. But if they're spotting it, that's where the problems start to come in.
Totally. And this domain of data quality monitoring is definitely one of the top AI related use cases that we also see. A lot of the initial flows that teams are building, they're flows to reconcile data between different systems. They're automations to look for exceptions and edge cases in a data set. And for something like a phone number, it's easy enough to build a logic rule that says, hey, it should look like this. If it doesn't, send us a trigger. But what we're also seeing teams do is use AI that can use a bit more judgment to infer what is an edge case, what is an exception, and then basically create like high, medium, or low risk for the different exceptions across different data sets, and then trigger those email and Slack alerts so that they can go take action as quickly as possible. And so whether it is something that's more, straightforward reporting or some of that more AI enabled error handling, there is a little bit of kind of a mindset shift that operators need to take as they're going from spreadsheets to working with data more programmatically. Can you talk a little bit about how you can successfully navigate that mindset shift?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I'm going to actually go back to what you were talking about a little bit earlier in this session, where you talked about software engineers and data engineers, and the mindset shift that's taking place here is that we're kind of going from being business operators to like quasi data engineers, and that is an important mindset shift. It's really kind of like from going from execution mode to design mode. And so, right, as operators, we're like our number one task is just like keep the business going, right? And sometimes that means, you know, doing some ad hoc work on the side, like making up this Excel file just to kind of, get the product moving, get it out the door, and get it to our customers. And so we tend to, from an operator perspective, like that's our mode. It's execution mode. Data engineers are thinking a little bit more long term. They're thinking about how can I build this so that it is repeatable, so that it's scalable, so that it doesn't break down all the time, so that it's easily digestible by my end users. There's very much there's a mindset shift, and it's kind of subtle. You don't If you just dive into these things, like I didn't realize it was happening until a couple of years after I got into automation. I was like, oh gee, I'm kind of like a quasi data engineer, right? Like you don't notice it. And so it's super helpful actually. I think we'll talk about this in a little bit, but it's super helpful to like learn about data engineering best practices because you can take a lot away and you can get much better at this stuff very quickly if you adapt those things. Then one other thing I want to call out, and this is just a very practical thing because operators in Excel, right? Like we use Excel all the time in operations, all the freaking time. And the thing about Excel, you're when we're talking about automation, we're talking about a lot of data, right? A lot of data flows, and Excel lets you break a lot of data rules that other platforms like Parabola don't let you break. And if you're not mindful of this, if you're not aware of that, you can run into some walls pretty quickly and get frustrated. And so there is again this shift. Like it is a feel in some ways a little bit more rigid than working with Excel, but along with that comes a ton of benefits. And so I encourage you to understand what it means to be working with relational data and how to work with data tables as opposed to just like the Excel free for all that Excel enables.
Totally. And one other thing that you previously mentioned to me was this idea around like needing to be really okay with failing as you're getting started building out automation,
Yeah.
and going through that testing process. What did that kind of look like for you and your team?
So especially early on, like everything's going to feel a little bit complicated. Like, why do I have to sign in here? And why is this not working the way I expected it to? And there's just a lot of unknowns. So the challenge is that tools like Parabola, AI, like there's all this stuff out there does make things super easy, but not but there's still a learning curve, right? You're still not just going to pick it up instantly. And I think sometimes there's that expectation that, oh, it's right, it's no code, it's easy, it's AI, it's just going to give me the answer, and that's not quite how it works. And so you need to be ready for to run into these things, and you know who your resources are. Go to like Parabola. You guys always get like 5-star reviews with your customer service, right? Like call up Parabola. Hey, why isn't this doing what I expected? I'm sure they'll figure it out relatively quickly. Um, so yeah, so just be ready. It is a journey. There is a learning curve. It's not insurmountable, but you got to be ready for it.
Yeah, and To develop or to have this mind shift set shift kind of permeate throughout the organization, were there maybe things that you did when talking to your teammates or that Lego did to really bring everyone along on this kind of mindset shift? Or if you were to go to back, are there things that you would do differently to get people starting to think about these things?
Yeah, like I said, like it kind of dawned on me retrospectively that that we're no longer really business operators. We're business people who we're like I said, we straddle the line between an operator
Yeah,
and a a data engineer. Um, and I think because we were diving into this, kind of without really any experience previously, a lot of it happened by accident.
yeah,
For me, I wasn't as mindful of that. And I think if I had known ahead of time, I would have said, okay, gee, it's probably a good idea if maybe I just like understand a little bit of SQL, and maybe, maybe I should talk to my tech team and tell them what I'm doing and get some tips from them, because they will, because like this is what they do, right? This is what they do all day, every day. They know so much about how to work with data. And we never really did that. We never, we have established those relationships at this point, but that kind of came after we had really gotten over, I'd say, a big part of the hump in terms of this learning journey. So yeah, just like going in knowing that this is different, and approaching it, I think deliberately like that, and taking advantage of the resources that you have at your disposal, is a great way to tackle that problem.
totally. And I think that, if you are in a leadership role and you want your team to really be adopting AI and automation, you kind of have to call that out and kind of explain to your team how they should be shifting their mindset to really see these things kind of come true. And I think one of the best partners in helping understand like how you should be thinking about working with data, how you should be thinking about integrations is by having a really tight collaborative relationship with your tech team, which if you're in operations land, maybe your relationship in the past has been like submitting tickets, waiting for improvement. Maybe there hasn't been a ton of collaboration there historically. How would you recommend operators collaborate and bring their tech teams along?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm glad you mentioned leadership, because when you are embarking on this automation journey, it's really important to have leadership's backing. And I would say your supply chain, your operations leadership should be talking to the tech leadership, and letting them know, hey, we want to do this, right? We need to do automation. Tech, you're great, but you guys have limited resources. You've got a massive backlog. You're keeping the lights on. There's all these, there's tons of other smaller things that you're not getting around to that we can do ourselves, but we need the tools to do it, right? And there's no code, there's AI. We know it's possible. We need your support, and that's really important, I think, for leadership to kind of set the tone and establish that collaborative relationship. Because the thing about these tools is that they they do, from an IT perspective, they do present risk. And and I have heard of IT organizations kind of hemming and hawing over these things. Like, I don't know if this is the right approach. And part of it is just like you know, they're honing in on our territory, kind of like a turf war kind of thing. And that's not really like that's not relevant. But they do also have a lot of legitimate concerns about about data security, and data quality, and ensuring uptime, and making sure that if you build something that's business critical, that it's not going to crash at a critical moment for the business, right? And again, like, this is what they do all the time. This is one of their biggest mandates, is to keep your systems up and running, and make sure that when they deploy new features, it doesn't crash the system for a day, things like that. And so that's what's going in their heads when they're saying, gee, I don't know about this. You may get that, you may not, but like, I've certainly seen it. Um, and so this is where, getting back to those data engineering, software development best practices, like, work with them, say, hey, what can we do to make you more comfortable with this? Because we need to do it, but we're willing to set some guardrails. We're willing to establish some ways of working and some structure and organization around this, so that we're doing it in in a smart and and sustainable and scalable manner, right? We will document things. We will monitor data quality. We will be careful not to build something that's too big to fail, right? Like if you have those conversations and agree with them on a set of guidelines, I think they'll be much more willing to help you pick a set of tools and turn you loose on them, and they'll be much more supportive when you need help, and you will need help. Like these tools are great and they're easy to use, and most of the time you won't need help, but sometimes you will. And if you've got a good relationship with your tech team, it's going to just make those situations much easier.
Totally. And when it comes to adopting and scaling up these new AI and automation tools, we've kind of seen two flavors from the different organizations that we work with. One flavor is, hey, we are an operations team. We're going to be really go getters. We're going to adopt this tool. We're going to start building. We'll get necessary approvals along the way, but maybe tech team isn't super involved there. Those can absolutely be successful. But what we see the most success with are teams that bring their tech team along in the journey. They're working together, and tech teams kind of play this role of dot connecting across the organization. They're really good at understanding these functions are trying to access the same data sets. How can we better structure this data to make it more accessible? How can we reuse components and different workflows being used on one team to help another team working on something really similar in different functions, different regions, so on and so forth. So definitely encourage you to kind of bring that team along in this process. And one thing that tech teams are always going to ask about is, hey, what are we exactly trying to do with the data that you're accessing? What are the use cases that we're actually focused on here? Would love to hear your perspective on how teams can think about identifying good use cases for automation and AI.
Yeah. So first of all, I want to call out a red flag, because I've run into this before. First thing you should be looking for is stable processes. If you're being asked to automate a process that changes every week, every month, every quarter, that is not a good process to be automating, because it does take time to build these automations. And by the time you are done building that automation, the process will have changed and you're going to have to go and revise it. And you're going to constantly be chasing it, and the automation is never going to work. This has happened to us. We've wasted tons and tons of time chasing a bad process that continues to change. So look at your stable processes, and then once you know kind of like which processes are stable, which ones aren't. I would be looking for the people who are like your Excel jockeys, right? Who is in Excel all the time? Who is spending hours every day, like downloading files and pushing buttons in Excel and emailing this to that person and emailing that to the other person. Like those are, especially from a first use case perspective, those are probably very low hanging fruit, because you know where the data is coming from. This person can probably tell you, yes, when I prepare this report, I download these files from these different systems, and then I do X, Y, and Z right here. They often have written it up, right, so that they can go on vacation. Speaking of documentation, and then and they can tell you kind of end to end, what are the inputs, what's the trigger, what does the output look like, and that's a great recipe for an automation, especially again when you're first embarking on this. That's what I would be looking for.
Yeah, that's spot on. And just to share a little bit of kind of our philosophy for identifying some of these use cases, if there are places where you're exporting CSV files, you're opening up Excel, writing VLOOKUPs, these are really obviously basic things that you probably do every single day in an ops role, but these present kind of the lowest hanging opportunities for a lot of these automations around things like reconciliations, PO and invoice management, setting up alerts and monitoring all of your different data sets. So very much aligned with what Bill was kind of getting at here. Now, once we align with tech teams, we build out these use cases. Then the next part of it is, how do we actually measure the impact that we're creating here? How do we continue to justify our investment? What has your experience been like working with leadership to actually measure the impact of these automations?
So you're measuring business outcomes is what it comes down to. When we talked about this a little while ago, Adam, you mentioned that some leaders are talking about measuring AI consumption or things like that. And like, frankly, I think that makes no sense, right? You are doing these automations so that you can improve the business, and there are certain ways that you're looking to improve the business. You are looking to save people time. You're looking to improve your service level. You're looking to reduce errors, improve accuracy. You're looking to prevent lost sales or whatever. Like there's some business outcomes. I think you probably know what they are. Your leaders know what they are. They're not secret, right? What are the key things that drive your business? How do you become profitable? How do you become more profitable? How do you improve your efficiency? Um, that's really what you want to be measuring. The one thing I will throw in there is that sometimes it's really hard to measure these things. And I'll give you an example. We got a use case the other day from our logistics team who came to us and they said, here's this reporting that we do all the time, and it takes us 2 to 4 hours a week to prepare. And like, okay, 2 to 4 hours a week, like that's it's sometimes savings. It's not bad. But as we started to have a conversation with them, they started to list all the ways that they were going to use this reporting. It was going to go into their quarterly reviews with their 3PLs. It was going to help reduce lead times. It was going to help their procurements with tenders and like all kinds of use cases they could see. And and how do you put a number on that? It can be really tricky. And so I think it's important to leave some room for those use cases where you say, yeah, it's hard to measure exactly the impact, but we know in our gut that this is a big one. This is an important one. And I think it's okay to tackle those, and then maybe like shoot first and ask questions later. Like go retrospectively say, okay, how are we using this reporting now, and how has it benefited these processes, and can we retroactively kind of put some numbers to it?
Totally. And aligning impact with kind of the underlying business KPIs, of course, makes sense. We are seeing that different flavor that you hit on of kind of evaluating teams and even individuals based on some of these AI consumption metrics.
Hmm.
What do you think that metric could be like a proxy for? Like, what are we really trying to get at with some of that reporting?
Uh, I'll try to answer that, but first of all, I just don't endorse that. But I mean, as a proxy for, I guess. So I was thinking about this. When you said earlier that you're starting to see these AI mandates from leadership, like I started asking myself, why do they have these mandates? Because I know your clientele. It's a lot of consumer goods companies. They're not tech companies, right? So like, why do their leaders care if they're adopting AI? And I think the answer is that we got to read between the lines. It's not that they care about adopting AI. It's that they know that there are business problems out there that a lot of them we take for granted because we've just been stuck with them for so long, and because we have not had the tools to address them until now. And so I think what they're doing is they're saying, look, there are these problems. We've been taking them for granted for a long time, but there are new tools out there that negate all of that. You should take nothing for granted and go figure out ways to solve these intractable problems. And one of my favorite examples of this is something that actually you guys at Parabola have solved for, which is PDFs and emails, right? Like in supply chain operations, like we get bills of lading, we get invoices, we get packing slips, we get all kinds of PDFs into our inboxes. And on the other side of those PDFs is some poor intern who has to manually open up every PDF and plug something into in their ERP or whatever. And now you can write a Parabola workflow that like reads the emails, extracts the PDFs, gets the data out of the PDF, like parses it and puts it into a more computer friendly format and sends it off wherever it needs to go. And you can just fully automate that. And so that's the kind of thing that they're saying, like, these PDFs in our emails used to be a problem. They're not anymore. Figure out how to solve it. I think. And so if you look at AI usage from that perspective, I think maybe you could tie them to specific use cases. Like, hey, we've been getting these BOLs for years. We fixed it, and now look, we're using this many AI tokens to, or whatever, however you're measuring it, to do this, and look at the time savings that we're getting, so you can kind of use it as like an ROI kind of thing.
Totally. Couldn't agree more about it being kind of like a proxy for solving new problems. And it even, I think, also comes down to not necessarily a new problem that we can solve, but a new person can solve this problem. What you just described of, getting PDFs via email, needing to parse that data, pipe it into a different system. If you're super technical, you're building, an OCR workflow connected to an RPA workflow, you're working with JSON. These are things that, you could have built 5, 10 years ago, sure. Is your person in an ops role going to build that with their kind of like spreadsheet driven foundational knowledge? perhaps not, but now AI is opening the doors to a lot of those new use cases. So I think it's leadership really encouraging the team to focus on how do we solve new problems, to your point there. And so maybe before we turn it over to the Q&A portion, I'm curious if you've either heard conversations, you've been involved, or any other kind of like AI adjacent tooling that you're excited about or have on your mind.
Yeah, so one thing that's exciting for me, and I've actually recently been coming across some people who are kind of poo-pooing it, but I'm still excited about it, is natural language querying. Because I'm a data guy. I've been doing reporting for years, and which means been building dashboards for years. And the thing about dashboards is that as soon as you build a dashboard, someone asks a question that it doesn't answer, and then you have to go build another dashboard. And that stinks, right? And so natural language querying is where AI can kind of like look at the data model behind the reporting, and ChatGPT style, plug a question in there, and it goes, and it in the background it'll write some SQL or whatever, and it will come back with the answer. And I think that's really cool. And like I said, some people are I think starting to identify some potential flaws with it, but I think there's also some at least some potential. I think some strong potential there. Um, and yeah, and then I'll just call out that I again, like, I hate documentation. I hate writing documentation, and I love the fact that I can have a computer document things for me now. I think that is just like everyone should be documenting everything now, because there's no excuse anymore.
Totally. And one on the documentation piece, one thing that we see a lot of teams doing is yes, you have a piece of documentation that you can go through and read, but a lot of times you're just trying to answer a specific question when you're
Mhm.
reading documentation. How does this one part of the process work? So we have teams opening workflows and then asking the chat, how are we actually building our reconciliation logic in this flow to kind of prompt for the documentation that you're looking for on demand, which I think is another interesting shift there.
That's awesome.
Um,
Right? Yeah, that's a great use case.
yeah, love it. Shifting gears into the Q&A portion, feel free to drop questions directly in the chat. Alan and Josh, thanks for getting us going. Bill, have my own perspective on this. I'll get yours first. How do you kind of view the relationship between a tool like Parabola and your ERP, and where the line kind of is between what's being owned in your core ERP versus a workflow automation tool?
So ERPs are great for accounting, right? They're great at like keeping track of things, movements in and out, right? Money, units, whatever. Like it's great for that. It's not great for reporting, right? It's not great for like summarizing. Here's what's taking place in your business at multiple levels of aggregation, and so for me, the first thing that I think of when I think of like what belongs in an ERP and what doesn't is like I always just want access to those back end tables, because they all like, if you're keeping your ERP tidy, it makes things so much easier to do all this automation and to get the kinds of higher level answers that you're looking for from your ERP that it doesn't provide. Um, and then the other thing I would say is just that ERPs, I'll say most ERPs, there are exceptions here, but most ERPs are not designed for your business. They're designed for a generic business like yours. And that means that there are going to be gaps in your ERP functionality. It's not going to always do 100% of what you want it to do. And that's where these automations come into play, because your IT team has a massive backlog, and you don't want to over customize your ERP. And so if you're stuck like, my ERP just doesn't do this and I need it to do this, like, that's another place where you need to automate.
Totally agree. And I'll preface my perspective by saying this totally depends on the scale that you're operating at as an organization. But I do think there is massive value in having a real central source of truth for all the data flowing across your tools. It's going to make integrations a lot easier. It's going to make it a lot easier to know you have that source of truth. But if you are earlier stage and you're kind of working across your WMS, Shopify, Google Sheets as a quasi ERP, I think tools like Parabola and a lot of the other AI tools on the market are delaying the need for that system of record. Maybe you're making it 6 months, a year, 2 years longer without an ERP than you might have previously. But eventually, you're probably still going to get to that point where you need a system of record. And then the workflows turn more from supporting your core system of record to how do we augment a lot of the processes, reporting, integrations, reconciliations that you were kind of hitting on there. So
Yeah.
totally agree. Bill, this isn't necessarily spot on with your experience, but let's talk about what if you don't have a tech team today? What if you're in a smaller organization and you're kind of as a supply chain team building these workflows, your sources of truth up from scratch? Does that change anything from how you've kind of shared your perspective today?
So obviously, I come from the Lego Group, a very large organization. I'm trying to put my small org hat on. I think I what I would say, and I'm hemming and hawing over this a little bit, but like I think especially early on, if you're in really a small organization like that, you can get away with, like, less documentation. You can get away with kind of a little bit more tribal knowledge, a little more just knowledge that, hey, if something goes wrong, I can call up my colleague, next door, who is, right, one of 20 people in the whole company, right? Like there's a different dynamic um, where you probably don't have to be quite as structured early on. Um, that said, eventually, as you grow and as you scale, hopefully your business is growing and scaling, you are going to want that stuff. So know that at some point you're kind of setting up some tech debt for yourself in a way, right? You're going to have to go back and add on to this. Like, eventually you'll have to do the documentation. You'll have to start monitoring a little bit better for data quality. You'll have to ensure that that things are scalable, that you're, all of that, all that we just mentioned. Like, I think there are things that you can put off to be a little bit less structured, at least initially.
Totally. And if you're living in a world where, you are supply chain and ops, but you're responsible for all the different systems, like it or not, you kind of are the tech team. And so a lot of the benefits of being the doctor connector in the organization, having a lot of control over how you're seeing and working with your data, not the worst spot to be in until you scale to a point where you really need someone else to come in there and support. To round us out here in the last 2 minutes, Bill, do you want to share with the group just a little bit about how they can find you after this session?
Yeah, well, I'm on LinkedIn. Haven't been active lately, but I plan to do so again next year. And I write about this kind of stuff all the time. And yeah, I'll just close by saying, like, we've barely scratched the surface of all the things that I wish I could have talked about here. There's so much. There's so many great ways, great approaches that you can take to really introduce automation into your business in a scalable and sustainable way. Feel free to find me on LinkedIn. And if you want to hear more, talk more about it, I enjoy this topic, and I could go on endlessly. So yeah, feel free to reach out.
Love it. That's awesome.
Oh,
And
and
Bill
I
is,
forgot to mention the Parabola Expert Network. Yes, I'm on the Parabola
yes.
Expert Network as well, which is another great resource. Yeah, Adam, you can say more about that one, I think.
Yeah, Bill, if you'd like to connect with Bill and get a consultation, just drop the link to the Parabola Experts page for Supply Chain Watchtower. So feel free to connect with Bill there. I'll include this in the email recap after this call, along with a link to Bill's LinkedIn. But if you do want to start putting some of the automation and AI tactics that we put to work today, feel free to sign up for a free trial of Parabola. But Bill, it was great to have you here and really appreciate you joining today.
This has been fun. I appreciate it. Thanks, Adam.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Bill. Have a good one. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.